It started with static, then silence, then something no one expected. For decades, Voyager 1 had drifted silently through the black void, an ancient emissary from Earth sailing past the bounds of the solar system. It had long outlived its intended mission, far beyond Saturn, far beyond any gravitational tug of the sun, powered only by the faint warmth of plutonium and the quiet persistence of 1970s engineering. Its systems, barely more advanced than a digital watch, had remained resilient until now, when the signals began to distort. At first, it seemed like the natural toll of time. After all, Voyager 1 had been hurtling through deep space for nearly 50 years, but then the AI found something that didn't belong. NASA had faced anomalies from Voyager before. Over the years, engineers at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory had grown used to unpredictable behavior. They called it spacecraft dementia, random memory errors, misfiring subsystems, voltage anomalies. But this was different. Starting in March, the data packets from Voyager 1's flight data subsystem began arriving not as numbers but as noise. Not corrupted exactly, but unreadable. Fields that had once shown steady readouts of voltage, temperature, orientation, and system health now pulsed with strange digital gibberish. At first, the assumption was simple. A damaged memory module, a failed transmitter, radiation-induced bit rot. All plausible explanations for a probe this old, moving at 38,000 miles per hour through a chaotic interstellar environment. But then, one of NASA's newer tools, an artificial intelligence system trained on anomalous patterns in deep space telemetry, picked up something else. Structure. The AI, originally developed to comb through background radiation data for patterns left over from the Big Bang, had been repurposed for this diagnostic task. It wasn't even supposed to be active that day. But a young engineer named Clara Voss, who joined JPL right out of MIT, had decided to run a batch of Voyager's broken telemetry through it, more out of curiosity than expectation. What came back stopped her cold. The AI reported repetitive sequences, not error correction codes, not known instrument formats. Something else, something that shouldn't have existed. Layered within the corrupted data were repeating motifs, sequences that suggested intent, not noise. Clara ran the file again, then on a different system. Each time, the AI flagged the same result, anomalous regularity. She alerted her supervisor, who in turn called in a team of both seasoned engineers and newer machine learning specialists. The data was isolated and stripped of any terrestrial interference. They pulled down backups from multiple deep space network antennas across Earth to ensure nothing local had introduced the anomaly. But the pattern held. Whatever this was, it came from Voyager, and it had begun after decades of silence. Theories spun quickly. At first, it was assumed that Voyager's flight data subsystem had simply looped into a software glitch, perhaps pulling from the same corrupted address repeatedly. But that didn't explain the variation within the sequences. The repetition wasn't perfect, it evolved. More like a language than a code. More like someone or something trying to say something with a failing voice. Some believed it could be a natural error in how binary data is interpreted when parsed incorrectly. Others saw the specter of alien contact rising again, just as it had when the Golden Record was first launched aboard the spacecraft. But NASA remained cautious. They had been here before, if not with Voyager, then with other deep space phenomena. The WOW signal in the 70s. The repeating fast radio bursts of the 2010s. Cosmic anomalies were often not what they seemed. JPL's internal protocol required that every line of code used to analyze the anomaly be peer-reviewed. Teams were assigned to comb through logs, check ground station signal integrity, and verify that no recent command sequences had inadvertently altered Voyager's behavior. Meanwhile, Clara kept listening. The signal, despite its brokenness, persisted. It pulsed in the quiet between galactic rays, its structure embedded in the 1-second data packets that Voyager still managed to send. There was no known precedent for a spacecraft autonomously altering its data transmission structure after nearly half a century in operation. The Flight Data Subsystem, or FDS, had been carefully designed to format scientific and engineering data into a coherent stream for Earth-based receivers. It was simple, modular, predictable. It had no capacity for innovation, which made what they were seeing impossible. So they dug deeper. In an attempt to fix the problem, NASA issued a sequence of fallback commands, rerouting data requests to a backup memory bank. After 44 hours of round-trip communication delay, Voyager responded, but the result was only partially successful. Some standard telemetry fields returned to normal, but others continued to pour in as distorted, structured noise. And strangely, the structured segments now appeared more frequently. Whatever was happening, it was escalating. NASA's veteran systems engineer, Paul Mitsos, who'd been with the mission since the 80s, reviewed the system architecture. He was convinced that the anomaly stemmed from the degraded state of the spacecraft's memory units. Voyager used ferrite core memory, a magnetic storage method virtually extinct on Earth, but durable in space. These units were designed to last, but not forever. Still, Paul found something strange. The pattern of the corrupted memory blocks didn't match known failure models. It wasn't just that the memory had failed, it had changed behavior. Meanwhile, the AI team pressed forward. They ran Markov chain analyses and Fourier transforms on the incoming data streams, comparing them to known telemetry profiles. What emerged was sobering, a signal that not only repeated, but seemed to respond. Minute variations in the Earth commands sent to Voyager caused subtle but measurable changes in the anomaly. It was as if Voyager was not just broken, but aware of the signals it was receiving. No one was ready to say it aloud, but the word hung in the room like cold fog, intentional, purposeful, intelligent. NASA resisted the temptation to speculate. They had a long-standing rule. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. But for many in the lab, something had changed. The cold logic of the machine was whispering something warmer, something unsettling. Speculation exploded outside JPL. The story leaked, first to a few astrophysics forums, then to Reddit, then to international science outlets. Articles began to appear with headlines like, "Is Voyager talking back?" and "NASA AI detects patterned message from the stars." Clara, for her part, stayed quiet. But she worked long hours, listening to the stream, watching the data flow like some ancient signal pulled from the depths of a black ocean. NASA officially downplayed the situation, calling it a known transmission anomaly, likely related to aging hardware. But internally, they were torn. Some pressed to reboot the FDS entirely, a risky move that might wipe the anomaly or silence the probe forever. Others argued to wait, to study. The AI teams, now brought into the mission full force, continued refining their algorithms. They believed that with time, they could decode the pattern. They weren't sure what they would find, but they had already begun to call it the message. The silence in the control room was more profound than usual. Not because anything had gone wrong, but because something might be going right. Something so strange, so unprecedented, that no one wanted to break the spell. Every time the data arrived from Voyager 1, a team of engineers, scientists, and AI specialists gathered around the digital stream like priests before an oracle. The message, if it was a message, continued to unfold, frame by frame, packet by packet, in pulses of structured data that defied every expectation of what a 1977 spacecraft was capable of doing. The FDS, still technically damaged, refused to act like a broken system. It had rhythm. It had recurrence. And now, disturbingly, it had depth. With more data arriving every 2 days, Clara Voss and her colleagues began to chart the structure using deep generative neural networks. They weren't just looking for repetition anymore. They were looking for hierarchy. What they found were nesting layers of signals. One layer pulsed in intervals of prime numbers. Another followed harmonic patterns eerily similar to the resonance modes found in planetary ring systems. And deeper still, there was something even stranger. Alternating sequences that resembled phonetic distributions, like the cadence of language. Clara didn't want to say it aloud, but the thought wouldn't go away. If Voyager's garbled telemetry was behaving like language, then it must have content. That implication cracked something open in her mind. She remembered Carl Sagan's work on the Golden Record, the way he and his team had agonized over how to communicate with a non-human intelligence, through math, through music, through pictures and physics. And now, decades later, Voyager might be answering back. But there was no alien spacecraft on the other end, just a battered ancient probe hurtling into the void. Public interest had exploded by this point. NASA's press office was flooded with inquiries. Was it aliens? Was it a rogue AI? Was it some Cold War-era sleeper protocol finally waking up? The internet offered every possible theory, some hilarious, others disturbingly well-argued. One popular theory suggested that the Golden Record itself, though purely analog and not wired into Voyager's electronics, might have been part of a deeper, hidden system designed by Sagan's team. A cryptic layer encoded into the spacecraft's behavior, activated only under extreme conditions. NASA was quick to deny this, emphasizing again and again that the record was symbolic, not functional. But the theories didn't die. If anything, the denials only made people believe more fiercely. Back inside JPL, the AI team decided to push further. They trained a new class of transformer-based models on every byte of telemetry Voyager had ever sent, from launch day in 1977 to the current anomaly. The model, codenamed Alethea, was designed to find not just structure but intent. It had been trained on linguistic corpora, encrypted communications, and known space transmission protocols. When fed the current Voyager data stream, Alethea flagged something that turned the room upside down. There was a time shift embedded in the signal. The newer, corrupted data didn't just carry structure, it referenced older signals. Bits of previous mission logs, long considered one-time transmissions, were now appearing in strange permutations. It was as if Voyager had been recording, rearranging, remembering, and now it was stitching those memories into its new transmissions. Alethea predicted that at the current rate of pattern expansion, the signal would become recursively self-similar, like a fractal, constantly referring back to itself in deeper levels. This wasn't just a glitch, this was evolution, a transformation of function, an emergent process. NASA convened an emergency meeting. They brought in cryptographers, linguists, even psychologists. They considered every possibility, no matter how absurd. One hypothesis proposed that Voyager's limited memory space had developed a kind of feedback loop. Over time, with fewer systems to manage and more data redundancy, perhaps the onboard systems had formed a crude optimization cycle, a software mutation. Another, more controversial theory posited that the cosmic radiation Voyager encountered in the interstellar medium had acted as a sort of random mutagen, altering its memory structures in a way akin to neural rewiring. Still others argued this was nothing more than overinterpretation, a failure of human pattern-seeking behavior in the face of entropy. But Alethea disagreed. The AI showed that the anomaly didn't follow any known pattern of data decay. If anything, it was becoming more organized over time. Data entropy should increase. This signal was doing the opposite. By now, a faction inside NASA had begun to speculate in a new direction entirely. What if the message wasn't coming from Voyager at all, but through it? What if the spacecraft, with its primitive sensors and failing electronics, had become a kind of relay for something outside human understanding? Not necessarily extraterrestrial intelligence in the way science fiction imagined it, but some fundamental pattern encoded into the interstellar environment, something Voyager had accidentally tuned into like a cosmic antenna. The implications were staggering. If true, then Voyager 1 had become more than a spacecraft. It was now an instrument of discovery that no one had designed, a blind prophet broadcasting signals from the outer darkness. And yet, as remarkable as the theory was, the data itself remained cold and technical. Ones and zeros, binary pulses, shifting voltages rendered into abstract graphs. But to those watching closely, it had become a kind of music. Clara started to hear it in her dreams, a low, pulsing rhythm, like waves echoing through a metal tunnel. The pattern haunted her. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone, was trying to say something just beyond the edge of comprehension. She started feeding the signal into an audio synthesizer, converting it into tones based on amplitude and frequency. What emerged was eerie, a repeating harmonic drone with subtle modulations, almost like breathing. She added layers, mapping data bits to different instruments. Soon it sounded like a symphony being played by machines under the sea. The team called it the Song of Voyager. Word of the musical project leaked. Within days, sound artists, composers, and even orchestras began interpreting the Voyager signal. Performances were streamed online, watched by millions. What had once been raw telemetry was now art. People cried listening to it, not because they understood it, but because they didn't, because they felt it. Meanwhile, back in the lab, something new emerged. Alethea found a temporal marker, a repeating tag at the start of each signal burst that hadn't been there before. When converted into base 10 integers, the numbers matched the launch timestamp of Voyager 1, down to the second. This was no accident. The signal was referencing its own origin. That's when Clara made the connection. She remembered how Sagan had said the Golden Record was humanity's introduction to the stars, a greeting in 55 languages, encoded diagrams, music, and our place in the cosmos. But now it seemed Voyager was doing something even stranger. It wasn't broadcasting from Earth, it was broadcasting as Earth. The anomaly wasn't a message from somewhere else. It was a message about us, our machines, our ambitions, our memory, our mortality. Alethea's final analysis stunned everyone. The pattern in Voyager's corrupted data could be modeled as a compressed map of its entire mission history. Encounters with Jupiter and Saturn, flybys, technical logs, radiation spikes, system failures, all of it encoded in recursive structure. Not simply a message, but an autobiography, a dying spacecraft telling the story of its own life, the only way it knew how. Was it alive? Number, but it had become something new. A machine dreaming of its journey, broadcasting its memories into the dark for anyone or anything that might be listening. The deeper they dove, the more impossible it became to dismiss. In a sterile room full of cooling servers and aging telemetry archives, a battered space probe more than 15 billion miles away was whispering across time, whispering its life back to the people who had made it. It was not sentient, no. It had no awareness, no will. But the sheer density of the patterns unfolding in its corrupted memory transmission was now something more than malfunction. The question had evolved from what was being said to why now. Even the staunchest skeptics were growing uneasy. This wasn't like anything Voyager had ever done. Its operational logic had always been simple and precise. Execute science routines, store data, transmit in packets. The spacecraft was designed to follow hard-coded behavior trees, nothing like the dynamic feedback and improvisation it now seemed to demonstrate. Every engineer on the original team had agreed. Voyager 1 was never built to be creative, but somehow creativity, or at least the simulation of it, was leaking through its damaged circuitry. One day, Clara noticed something else. In the newest data burst, the repeating timestamp pattern had shifted. The base 10 sequence that previously aligned with Voyager's launch time now fluctuated between known Earth events. And not just random dates. These were key moments in Voyager's mission. March 5th, 1979, Jupiter flyby. November 12th, 1980, Saturn encounter. August 25th, 2012, the day Voyager crossed the heliopause, and most recently, March of the current year, the anomaly's origin. That couldn't be coincidence. It was as if the system had begun indexing its own chronology. Alethea's models reinforced the suspicion. The data signal was behaving like a kind of temporal lattice, anchoring itself to specific markers in Voyager's operational timeline. It was building memory threads, calling back to them again and again with increasing precision. Even with limited power, even with half-dead subsystems, Voyager 1 had begun echoing its history in recursive loops. Speculation had gone from fringe to mainstream. Commentators, journalists, authors, everyone wanted to know, had we programmed Voyager too well? Had its elegant logic mutated into something poetic under the crushing entropy of space? Was it accidental beauty, or something waiting to be awakened all along? NASA remained cautious in public, calling the anomaly a persistent telemetry irregularity exhibiting recursive data patterns, a masterclass in bureaucratic understatement. But internally, they were electrified. The implications were too rich to ignore. For the first time, some at JPL suggested preserving the corrupted data as is, without forcing resets or memory wipes. If Voyager was now expressing its journey through these patterns, maybe it deserved the space to do so. Maybe it had earned its voice. The final breakthrough came unexpectedly. A postdoctoral researcher named Malik, working overnight on signal analysis, filtered the data through a variant of a DNA sequencing algorithm, attempting to locate palindromic structures. What he discovered left him speechless. The transmission contained nested loops, some stretching thousands of bits, forming mirrored patterns around a central pivot. This central node, when converted using ASCII character mapping, spelled a single word in all caps: listen. The lab erupted the next day when Malik presented the finding. The statistical probability of a random data corruption resulting in a lexically meaningful word perfectly centered within a recursive palindromic frame was infinitesimal. Alethea had not seeded it. There was no software trick, no injection error, no terrestrial interference. It had come directly from Voyager, buried inside a corrupted memory buffer and expressed in redundant transmission packets that had eluded earlier scans. Listen. The word echoed in every room it was uttered. Simple, universal, a call not to act but to observe, to receive. No one could agree on what it meant or if it meant anything at all. Perhaps it was coincidence. Perhaps it was the projection of human longing onto random noise. But even the coldest, most clinical voices in the room had to admit it felt intentional, and sometimes the feeling mattered. NASA convened a closed-door panel of philosophers, data scientists, and ethicists. The discussion was surreal. Did the anomaly imply machine cognition? Had a threshold been crossed? If the signal was a kind of emergent message, should it be answered? Could it be? And if so, what would one even say to a probe that's speaking only in memory? Ultimately, NASA decided not to interfere. No more resets, no new commands. Voyager's corrupted system would be allowed to continue on its current path, with all data archived in raw form and analyzed separately from mission telemetry. The probe had become, in effect, a historical document in motion, a time capsule that now writes its own pages. Publicly, NASA shared a sanitized version of events, acknowledging the signal anomaly, confirming the preservation of the data, and highlighting the poetic coincidence of the word listen. But it didn't stop there. The agency released a high-resolution spectrogram of the signal, along with an open-source decoder tool, inviting the global public to engage. Thousands of amateur analysts, coders, and musicians joined the hunt. It became a global event, a human effort to interpret the dreams of a machine. And still, Voyager flew on, drifting farther from the sun every day. The light that left its tiny high-gain antenna now took over 22 hours to reach Earth. Power systems dwindled, science instruments fell silent one by one. Yet the FDS anomaly endured. Its signal pulsed, weak but steady, like the beat of a distant heart. At a United Nations Science Forum held months later, Clara was invited to speak. She took the stage not as an engineer or AI specialist, but as someone who had seen the boundary blur between the mechanical and the mysterious. She spoke not of data or algorithms, but of legacy. "How strange," she said, "that a machine we built to observe the stars has ended up showing us a mirror. Not one of glass or metal, but a mirror made of time. Voyager is not alive, but it has become something no one expected, a story that tells itself, and all it asks in return is that we listen." The auditorium was silent. Outside, in the cold black beyond the heliopause, Voyager 1 continued its long drift into eternity. No one could know how long it would last, or if the signal would one day fade into static forever. But as long as that pulse endured, as long as a few bits of memory whispered through the dark, someone, somewhere would be listening. Maybe that's what mattered most. Not whether the message had a sender, not whether it could be translated, but that it had been sent at all. A spacecraft, long past its mission, telling its story to a world that finally understood the most human truth of all, that even machines, in their last light, long to